we're going to be sifting through the matchups to find the best starts and sits and sleepers for Sunday. Starting with the Patriots and the Chiefs. Rank, other than people who are a decade away from $500 million, who are you starting in this game?
Well, I'm going to go with Cam Newton, who's the QB7 on the season. He scored at least 25 fantasy points in 2 of his 3 games this year. And I know last week was a little bit of a disappointment, mostly because he gave a lot of those touchdowns to Rex Burkhead. But it wasn't like Cam was playing poorly, like anything but. Like, he was playing really well, and sometimes those games happen. So I'm gonna start him this week against Kansas City, who've been pretty generous. You see right there, you can read 25 plus fantasy points to two of the 3 quarterbacks they face. So feel safe starting Cam this week.
Personally, I'm going to go over on the other side, reaching out to the people struggling in the wake of a moved game here and there, and say, if you want maybe a boom candidate, it's Mecole Hardman here on a couple of fronts. We know Belichick's affinity for scheming against playmakers, and we know Andy Reid, as we saw on Monday night, even with a full contingent out wide, Sammy Watkins back, they were still able to scheme up a big play for Mecole Hardman. If you lost to Chase Claypool this week or want somebody with some DFS potential at a good value, take a look at Mecole Hardman. Speaking of explosive offenses, the Dallas Cowboys are playing host to the Cleveland Browns. Who do you have starting in this game, Marcus?
Well, if we're talking about showdowns, who better than a Cowboy? Let's go CD Lamb. I know it's been sort of hard to pinpoint which Cowboys receiver is going to pop in any given week. I think all 3 of their main receivers are good picks, but I'm really going to go with CD Lamb here. Cleveland's allowed the 2nd most yards, 2nd most touchdowns to slot receivers through the first 3 weeks. Lamb getting 87% of his snaps and about 3/4 of his targets from the slot. I also have a feeling they're really going to work to try to get him his first NFL touchdown this week, so I feel pretty confident with CD Lamb.
I like that call a lot, Marcus. And on the other side of this game, I'm going to go with Odell Beckham Jr., and I have him as a must start this week. The Cowboys are allowing the 2nd most fantasy points per game to wide receivers right now, and I think the Browns are going to have to throw more than they have in their last 2 games. I think they're going to have to throw a lot to keep up with Dak Prescott and that high-powered Cowboys offense. And if you're not using Odell in this week in this good matchup, why is he on your roster? Trade him then to someone else who can use him.
Yeah, a lot of folks who drafted Odell probably happy to hear that. Let's go over to the Chargers, taking a trip to Tampa Bay. Marcus, your thoughts on this one?
Yeah, I'm worried about Hunter Henry this week. I think I'd leave him on my bench if I had some other options. The Bucs allowing fewer than 9 fantasy points per game to the tight end position. Only 2 red zone targets for tight ends all year against the Bucs. Also have a little bit of worry just about Justin Herbert. I mean, he got to face a Kansas City team that had 0 idea he was starting. In fact, he had 0 idea he was starting that week. And then last week was an undermanned Carolina defense. This Bucs defense isn't bad, and they've had time to sort of study some film, so I worry that maybe Justin Herbert might have a rough go of it.
Speaking of players that we're worried of, I'm going to say beware of Ronald Jones this week. I know a lot of people are going to look to get him into their lineup because there's no Leonard Fournette this week, but it is still a really tough matchup. The Chargers are allowing the 5th fewest fantasy points per game to running backs this season and the 6th fewest rushing yards. We know LaShawn McCoy is going to be involved in the passing game. I'm just saying, beware, he is not a slam dunk this week.
All right, let's look over to the Saints and the Lions now. Adam Rank, what do fantasy managers need to know about this one?
Well, I believe that Matthew Stafford is a nice sleeper candidate if you have a quarterback who's not going to play this week. I would go look at Stafford, who's had at least 2 touchdown passes in back-to-back games. Should have been 3, except, DeAndre Swift dropped one. But you know what? I'm not crying about that. But the Saints have allowed 20-plus fantasy points to quarterbacks in every game this season, including what happened last week with Aaron Rodgers. So if you need a quarterback, Matthew Stafford's a really good option.
And I'll keep it going along those same lines, Rank. They did that. They allowed those points to quarterbacks with Marshawn Lattimore and Janoris Jenkins. Both of them are out on Sunday. And so I think a lot of focus from the remaining Saints secondary goes to Kenny Golladay, as it should. Maybe Malcolm Jenkins is on TJ Hawkinson. But what do they do with Marvin Jones, who played 91% of offensive snaps last week? He caught 100% of his targets. I know what to do with him. I play him against an injury-riddled Saints secondary. It's our next Sunday showdown, Rank. You've been on the Seahawks hype train for all of this 2026.
Yeah, so I'm going to keep it going, and I want to talk a little bit about DK Metcalf, because I don't think people understand the amazing season that he's having. Your guys are like, oh, it's good. But no. You don't understand how good it is. It's like when I'm trying to tell people about Cobra Kai and they're like, yeah, it's good. You're like, no. This might be the best show that I've ever seen. And this might be one of the best young receivers in the game. He's had at least 19 fantasy points in every game this season. He's fourth in the NFL in air yards. And you consider how good he was. He left a touchdown on the board last week. So make sure that DK Metcalf is starting for you each and every week. And I don't want to see any questions about it ever again.
Sticking with a wide receiver in that game, I think Preston Williams is a sleeper this week. Seattle's allowing 73 fantasy points per game to wide receivers. No one else is even allowing 50 per game. They're allowing 379 receiving yards per game to the position. No one else is even allowing 250. So it just shows you what a great matchup this is. And Seattle will be without Jamal Adams this week. So in a game that I expect them to have to throw to keep up with Russell Wilson and DK and that high-powered offense, I think there's going to be a lot of opportunity for Preston Williams.
Couple of offenses we expect to do some things. Let's look over to the Ravens against the football team in the Beltway Bowl. And I want to get sleepish because I know you're trying to figure out the Ravens' backfield. We are too. There's a solid split among Dobbins and Ingrams in terms of snaps played. But a lot of folks are in a particular situation this week. They need bodies on their lineups. And the Ravens are going to have a difficult time eventually ignoring the fact that Gus Edwards, the power back, is averaging over 7 yards a carry this season. He may be touchdown dependent, yes, but it's going to happen at some point. I say, why not this week? Go Gus Edwards.
I like it. And sticking with a running back in this game, I'm saying sit Antonio Gibson. Look, I get it. He has scored double-digit fantasy points in each of the last 2 weeks, but it's because he has found the end zone and scored a touchdown. I don't love his chances of doing that this week. The Ravens have allowed just 1 touchdown to running backs this year and the 4th fewest fantasy points per game. I think this is a bad matchup for the rookie, and I would look to get him out of my fantasy lineup.
So no Gibson for Florio. Let's look over to the Vikings visiting the Houston Texans. Marcus, who is your must start in this game?
It's Dalvin Cook, and I know people are going to be like, well, of course he's a must start. He's the top 6 pick in most fantasy leagues. I get it. But this is sort of just reassurance. Houston has allowed the most rushing yards in the NFL. They've given up 160-plus rushing yards in all 3 games. And look, the Vikings really would prefer to go out there and try and establish the run because of game script, because of their poor defense. They've been forced into situations where they have to throw the football maybe more than they would like. But I look for the Vikings to get out there, try and get the ground game going early, and then they just sit back and hashtag let Dalvin cook.
Everybody's cooking over the course of the weekend. Frank, who are we starting in this matchup?
Well, I'm going to go with Deshaun Watson in this one. And I know that if you're putting this just based on production alone, that Deshaun Watson is a questionable should I start him or not. But what's not questionable is how that Vikings defense has been playing this season. They're Vino. Vikings in name only. They've allowed the third most passing yards per game this season. Quarterbacks are throwing for about 300 against them every time they go back there. So this is a get-right game for Deshaun Watson, and I'm expecting him to step up huge in this one.
Cardinals, Panthers, rank. You got a sleeper in this one.
I do. I'm going to suggest Andy Isabella as a sleeper for your roster. Number 1, DeAndre Hopkins is on the injury report. He's expected to be a game-time decision. That could open up an opportunity for Isabella, who has done pretty well. Last week, he stepped up, had one of his best games of his career, 20 fantasy points against the Lions. He's averaging 19 yards per reception, a deep threat. So if you want to still have a part of that Cardinals offense in the wake of a possible, an injury concern to DeAndre Hopkins, this is a player that I would look at.
And there's some issues in the secondary on the other side for Arizona. Budda Baker and Chris Baker missing practice this week. And Drake Kirkpatrick limited as well. They're not healthy back there. And if you're in a league where the streaming quarterback situation gets kind of competitive, Teddy Bridgewater is right there against that wounded Arizona Cardinals secondary. From there, we'll go to the Giants and the Rams. Once a matchup of Pro Bowl running backs. Now it's a couple of running back committees, Mr. Florio.
Yeah, with Cam Akers out again this week, I think Darrell Henderson is someone that you should all try to get into your fantasy lineups. He's gone for 120 yards and a touchdown in 2 straight games. And the Rams are running the ball more than any team this year at 54% of their plays. Plus, the Giants have allowed the 9th most fantasy points to running backs. And this is a game that I'm expecting the Rams to have a lead from early on, which should just lead to even more carries for Darrell Henderson.
Well, where the Rams feel confident about their running back committee, the Giants maybe not so much, which is why I think Evan Ingram is poised to actually do something this week. I know it's been a rough start to the season for him, but maybe even more reason that they really try to move him around and get him going. The Rams have given up 3 touchdowns to tight ends. That's tied for 4th most in the league. And tight ends have been targeted heavily in the red zone against this LA defense. 8 red zone targets, tied for the 2nd most. The Giants have to get something going offensively, and Evan Ingram could be the guy to kind of get it kick-started.
The offense has struggled. A couple of offenses that have not struggled, the Bills and the Raiders. And we got to start with our resident Bills fan.
Yeah, Zach Moss is questionable right now, but he is trending like he's in the right direction. It looks like he's going to play, and that is great because the Raiders is the best possible matchup for a running back so far this year. They're allowing the most fantasy points per game, the most receiving yards per game, and the most touchdowns to running backs so far this year. And that's big for Moss because he will be used in the passing game by the Bills, and he is their goal line back. So don't be surprised if he scores a touchdown this week.
I'm going to start him, but I'm also going to say that Josh Jacobs is a must start. And I know this is obvious, but I know that there's some of you out there who have had injuries to the running back position. Maybe you've had some unexpected buys this week, and you just want to find a positive piece of your lineup. Josh Jacobs is going to be that player. He's got a great matchup this week against the Bills. Darrell Henderson had 20 points against them last week. He is going to do that and then some.
Let's get some more Sunday showdowns. We got Jacksonville at Cincy. Rank, who are you starting here?
Well, I'm going to go with Tyler Boyd. I'm trying to figure out which one of these Bengals receivers I want to focus in on the most, but Boyd has been the most consistent. His targets, his receiving yards, and his fantasy points have increased in each game this season. He's been a top 10 fantasy wide receiver in 2 consecutive games. So for me, that's who I'm going to go with.
I'm going with a sleeper on the other side, and Keelan Cole. He's averaging around 6 targets a game, catching the majority of those. And yes, he's playing a defense that's one of the best in scoring against wideouts, but I think that's the schedule more than the defense itself. I think you could do much worse than Keelan Cole this week. Frank, we will stick with you as we go to the Colts playing the Chicago Bears. What do you see there?
I really like Mo Alley Cox from the tight end position. He's currently right now playing at a high level. He's had at least 14 fantasy points in back-to-back games. He's a very athletic player, and I know that it's easy just to say Phillip Rivers loves to target his tight ends. But listen, there's certain things about Phillip Rivers that we just know, and one of them is that he loves to go to the tight ends, and this is a really good matchup against the Bears defense. The defense is good, but they've allowed a top 15 fantasy tight end in 2 of the last 3 games. Last week, Hayden Hurst got into the end zone, didn't do much more after that. So that's why I'm going to go with Mo Alley Cox this week.
I'm looking at a deep sleeper on the other side there, and that would be Cordero Patterson. And we were sort of asking the question, what happens to all those targets and those touches now that Tariq Cohen is on IR and is gone for the year? And the early indications, certainly from Matt Nagy, are that it could be Cordero Patterson. He was actually already second on the team in rushing attempt. They'd like to use him sort of as a running back. More opportunity now possibly coming with Tariq Cohen on IR, who was playing 43% of the snaps. We'll see how many of those go to Patterson, but we know that he is a wide receiver by trade, so the opportunity for him to slot in to the passing game and be a pass catcher out of the backfield shouldn't be an issue. Look, it's outside of deeper leagues and maybe taking some long shots in DFS. You're probably not starting him, but there is an opportunity there for Cordero Patterson to maybe pop in week 4.
Still one of the more explosive players in the league, even at this stage in his career. Finally, Sunday Night Football, Eagles-Niners, where Deebo Samuel will have his first chance to play this season. And I'm going to reach out to those in the crowd who might have chosen this week to give up on Zach Ertz. And I'm going to say, no, don't do that. He had 7 for 70 last week. Dallas Goedert goes to IR, so you get 8 to 10 targets potentially for Ertz. And I know the Niners defenses have been good against tight ends. You want the name of those tight ends that they've been good against? Dan Arnold, who averages 3.6 points a game. Chris Herndon, who comes in at a smooth 4 points a game. And Evan Ingram on the 2020 offensive juggernaut New York Giants. He had his second best game against the 49ers. I will start Zach Ertz because they got to throw it to somebody.
Wait, so are you trying to say that Zach Ertz is currently on some sort of offensive juggernaut? And we've seen the Eagles play this season. And one of the things is, with all the injuries that they've had, with Deshaun Jackson being doubtful, Dallas Goedert, Jalen Reagor out for Sunday, that really allows the 49ers the opportunity to just take away Zach Ertz. And that's who they focus on. Like, you would put a shutdown corner on a team's number one wide receiver. In this Eagles offense, their top pass catcher is Zach Ertz. That's the one thing that concerns me. That's why I would try to avoid him. I was talking about Mo Alley Cox earlier in this segment. I would rather go with somebody like that. Now, I wouldn't go too far down the list and start just pulling out all these curtain jerkers and mid-card jobbers to put over Zach Ertz. But if you have a viable option, then I would go with him.